to tell you something. I saw one of the funniest things I've ever seen on the beach yesterday. And now, a dramatic retelling of this event. So, I got to go out to the beach yesterday with my wife and my two little girls. It was perfect. Perfect day. I'm talking the sun is shining, the birds are singing, there's seagulls there too. Like often, like everything you imagine when it comes to the beach, it's awesome. The weather is perfect. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's just warm. Put on just the right amount of sunscreen because you get that minimal amount of burn, so you know you got a good tan. You look good later, but not so much that you feel uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying. It's one of those days. We're having fun. We're digging sandcastles, piling things up. Sloan, my little one's coming in and stepping in it and just laughing about it. It's wonderful. This family next to us has started wanting to come play with Sawyer because they had a little girl about the same age. So we're doing all of that. Beautiful, wonderful day. Nobody's playing music on the beach, which is a big win for me. If you know anything about me, that's a bugaboo of mine. Just a little quick PSA, public service announcement for you. If you go to the beach and you are blasting music from your boombox, I'm judging you. All right? I want you to know that you're a sociopath. I need you to understand that. Just kidding. Maybe not. But, all right, so nobody's doing that. Everything's great. It's wonderful. And then I hear, off in the distance, probably about 50 yards away down the beach that way, I hear, Braden, no, Braden, stop. And I look over because that's what you do in that. And so I look over and I see, and there's this little boy, he's about 3 years old, and he's running towards me, just booking it. I mean, running our direction. He's 50 yards away, but he's just moving. He's a fast little 3-year-old kid, all right? Wouldn't be surprised to see him in the Olympics someday. He's very fast. And then I see his mom behind him, and he is running significantly faster than she is, like way faster. And she's going, stop, stop, stop. And he's laughing about it, just loving life, laughing about this. He gets so far ahead of her that he stops where he is, looks at her, does a little dance, and then takes off his shorts. And he is just naked as the day he was born. And it's hilarious. And she's just like, no! And you can tell that he's done this before at some point because he thought about it in his mind. Like, this would be a good thing for me to do again. He was obviously wanting his mom's attention and wanted to get a rise out of her. He's 3 years old, so, I mean, advanced thinking going on. Now, this triggers something in her brain. Just like most of you, if you've been a parent or if you have somebody you've ever watched on your own before, right? This triggers something in her brain. Like, I need to get to him faster than I am currently moving so that he will not be naked on the beach any longer. Normal stuff. But you've probably experienced this at some point if you're over the age of like 23. The older you get, the less your body does what your brain tells it to do. Right? The older it seems to be a correlation there. So her brain, it tells her body to go faster. And so her brain is like, hit the nos, man, go faster, move faster, put this thing into warp speed. And so her body tries to do it, but it can't. And so she gets really uncoordinated and falls flat on her face in the sand in her bathing suit there. And her son is just laughing and dancing naked while it's happening. He gets and starts running even faster. And that is my funny story from the beach yesterday. Here's why I tell you that story. Because you and me, are like that kid a lot. Not that we go running around naked on the beach, but that we are always running around looking for recognition. We're going from one thing to the next, don't we? We move from one thing to the next, looking for somebody to recognize us, somebody to see us, somebody to validate us, to value who we are and what we just did. And so a lot of times the way we do that, the way we get that validation, is we go from this level of something and we try to climb a ladder in it to the next level. Whether it be at a job, right? You're always trying to move up. You're never content. You're always trying to move up, and you'll be cutthroat to get there. Or maybe instead it's you're volunteering in an organization, maybe even a church like ours, and you're just constantly trying to move on to the next thing. You can't figure it out. We're constantly moving, trying to find recognition. And so if you've ever found yourself in that situation, whether it be at work or in a service organization, or maybe just going from one kid's activity to the next activity so that everybody thinks you're the greatest parent, or maybe it's just you posting stuff about yourself on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok or whatever, and just showing everybody how great your life is, but everybody knows it's really not that great. Let me ask you something. Do you think that that's the abundant life Jesus was talking about bringing? Do you think that that's the life that Jesus wants? Whenever Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." Do you think that's what he's talking about? Turns out, no. We've been following Jesus through the Gospel of Mark in a series we're calling Chasing the Lion. And these words aren't just Mark's words. These are words that Mark gets from the Apostle Peter, somebody who was there with Jesus when all of this stuff was going on. And as you read through the Gospel of Mark, I hope you've been keeping up, reading every day as much as you can. As you read through the Gospel of Mark, you can kind of hear Peter saying this stuff. Yeah, and then we were going and we were doing this. And it wasn't long after that, we went over here and we did this over here. Well, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus sometimes has to deliver some hard truths. And today, the story we're looking at in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 30, we're going to see another hard truth Jesus has to tell. Because where we're picking up is right after Jesus has released this young boy from a demon possession. In fact, really what happens is his dad walks up while Jesus is off with a few of the disciples, and he sees Jesus' disciples, and he says, "Hey, look, I'm looking for Jesus. Can you help me out here? I need him to cast this demon out of my son. It causes a big problem for him and for our entire family. Can you help us out here?" And the disciples look around and say, "Well, Jesus isn't here, but, Jesus taught us everything we need to know. We are his successors. We are his inheritors. We're the ones like that. We can do." In fact, he sent us out to do this very thing before. Sure, bring them on over here. We got this. But they can't. They can't cast this demon out. So they sit there in this awkward moment for a long time. They sit there doing this really awkward thing for a long time. And Jesus finally walks up. And Jesus says, "What's going on here?" And they said, "Well, we're trying to cast out this demon." And he says, okay, I got this. Casts out the demon and says, "Hey, this kind only comes out through prayer." And right after that, in verse 30, we read this. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know where they were. So they left that place. Now, we have a map to kind of help us figure this out, so bear with me. Now, we don't know exactly where Jesus was when we're talking about that place, but in general, we're thinking of right around here where this red arrow is, around the region of Caesarea Philippi. He could have been down closer to Bethsaida, right down here, closer to the Sea of Galilee. But Galilee itself is this kind of shaded in version here, or area here. Right? You got all that. And that's where Jesus and his disciples, most of his disciples, are from. Jesus, obviously you remember, is from Nazareth. And he made his home base out of Capernaum. This is his area. This is his go-to spot. He's the hometown hero. Think about that. He just cast out a demon. He's moving back through town. And he's going into the area where people know him. These were the people who knew him when. Before he became a rock star, he was preaching in their little tiny churches. Before he became the guy, he was preaching, he was talking in all of those little areas. But as he starts moving back through, he doesn't want anybody to know he's there. This would have been a great time for him to get an ego boost or something like that. He didn't want anybody to know he's there. And why doesn't he want anyone to know he's there? Well, verse 31 tells us. Because he was teaching his disciples. He was teaching his disciples. This would have been a great time for an ego boost. Because what he's teaching his disciples, what we find out next, is of utmost importance. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him. And after 3 days he will rise." So he's teaching some pretty important stuff. What he's basically doing is he's predicting his own death and resurrection for the second time in the Gospel of Mark, by the way. If people want to know why I believe that Jesus was the Son of God, why I believe he was the Messiah, and why I follow him, it's for this very reason. Jesus predicted his own death and his own resurrection. His disciples didn't get it. And then when he died, they all fled. They scattered. Nobody wanted to be around because they knew people were coming for them. They thought that they had been swindled. They thought that Jesus had kind of made this all up and that they had just been suckered. But then something happened, and a few weeks later, they're all back in the fold, and they're all preaching and talking about Jesus. And what they said happened, what they said changed everything, was they saw a resurrected Jesus. It would have been easy for them to stay off and be quiet. It would have been easy. Nobody would have been really coming for them. They could have disappeared. They didn't even have the internet back then, apparently. But they said, what changed everything for them, what motivated them, was seeing the resurrected Jesus, the one who not long before had predicted his own death and his own resurrection. And then he pulled it off. And this is just a good rule of thumb in life. If anybody can predict their own death and resurrection and pull it off, you listen to them. You do what they say. Now this term, Son of Man here, that's a phrase we get used to seeing with Jesus, but it's actually a term from the Old Testament. And it's used for like a Jewish kingly figure. And that person is supposed to bring deliverance and judgment to the Jewish nation. Deliverance and judgment to the Jewish nation and anybody who oppressed them. So you can imagine, if you keep that in mind, Jesus saying, the Son of Man, he's referring to himself. He's done this throughout the gospel. So the Son of Man, this person who's supposed to bring deliverance and judgment, is going to actually be delivered into the hands of men. The people he's supposed to be judging and delivering. They will kill him. And after 3 days he will rise. He's saying something that doesn't compute in the disciples' brain. It doesn't compute. That's not what they were told was supposed to happen. The Son of God, this Messiah figure, the Son of Man, this Messiah figure isn't supposed to be able to die. So why would Jesus say that he's going to be killed and after 3 days he's going to rise? They're obviously a little bit confused. And so that's what we find out in verse 32. They did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. They didn't want to look dumb in front of Jesus. By this point, they've been following him for like 3 years, so they should understand when he says things like this. They should have picked up on this, but they don't. They don't really get what's going on. Now, you can't blame the guys. You can't really blame them too much. They were always told the Messiah wasn't going to die, that they were going to restore Israel. And how could Israel be restored if Jesus, the Messiah, was dead? How could that ever happen? He was supposed to be invincible. Besides, they'd watched him walk on water. They'd watched him feed thousands and thousands with just like a picnic basket. They'd watched him raise people from the dead. How could he die? He's invincible. Now, the other option is they could have understood exactly what he was saying and just buried their heads in the sand. You and I have done things like that before, right? Somebody delivers a hard truth to us, tells us something we really need to hear, and we bury our head in the sand about it. Maybe you've gotten a diagnosis before, or someone you love has gotten a diagnosis before, and you just ignored it as much as you possibly could. Acted like it wasn't true. If that's you, you probably know at least how some of the disciples felt. So Jesus says this, and they continue on walking towards Capernaum. They came to Capernaum, which is kind of his home base. It's where everything's operating out of. When he was in the house, it's probably Simon Peter's house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? Remember, you're walking on a road with 12, 13 other guys and some other people who are lagging behind you. Maybe you're not going to walk all next to each other where everybody can hear in one group. That'd be annoying for long periods of time. So you're probably walking 2, 3, or 4 at a time, and there's some others behind you. Jesus is the rabbi. He's most likely walking at the front always. They're trying to hear what he has to say. So he probably hears from the back a little bit of arguing and commotion going on. He hears what's going on. Now, I've led a lot of youth ministries in my days, and I'm used to hearing people squabbling in the back about something and having to go back and fix it later. So Jesus does exactly that. He says, what were you arguing about on the road? But the disciples are great here. They're great here because they know they're caught. They know they're in the wrong. Verse 34, but they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. They knew they were wrong for that. They knew that they shouldn't have been talking about this. I mean, think about it. Jesus just told them that he was going to die. And their response is to sit in the back and argue about who gets to take over. Their response is to sit in the back and to argue about who's the greatest. Because in their minds, whoever the greatest was going to be Jesus' successor, was going to be the person who took over for Jesus. Now, they probably explained it away in their own minds, thinking, well, we got to think about this now. You can probably imagine the flow of the conversation. Jesus tells them he's going to die, and then he'll rise. They don't really get that. And so in the back, somebody goes, yeah, but somebody's got to take over, right? Who's it going to be? Somebody over here says, not you, Thomas. Definitely not you. Well, why not me, James? It could definitely be me. And then you can start hearing them talking about how, well, you couldn't even get that spirit out of that little boy. Man, that demon was in that little boy. You couldn't even do anything about it. Well, you couldn't have done it either. You were just off doing something with Jesus. You can hear that argument, right? The greatest. Keep that in mind, because Jesus looks at this as a time to teach. Remember, he started. This is the end of his public ministry. He doesn't want people to know that he is around anymore. He has started his journey towards Jerusalem, where he'll ultimately be crucified. This is the last part of his life. He's imparting his final words to his followers. So he pulls them over and he says this. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12, that's the disciples, and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last, and the servant of all. Now, a lot of us, because it's so catchy, especially in other translations, we love this first must be very last. The first must be last, the last must be first. My mom used to love saying that. It was this real pithy saying. So she'd say that anytime me and my brother would run and try to get in front of each other for things. If we're going to get candy at the movies and trying to get in line, or if we're trying to get in the front car seat or whatever, my mom would walk up and instantly go, whoever wants to be first must be last. But that's not what Jesus is talking about, is it? The key to that is right here. The servant of all. You want to be great? You want to take over for me, Jesus says? You want to do what it is that I do? You want to act like I'm Alexander the Great, and you're my generals, and when I die, we're going to split this thing up between the greatest generals within me, right? You want to be great? Well, here's what you got to do. You got to be the very least, which means you have to be the servant of all. And we know what this looks like. We know what it means to be the servant of all, right? It means putting yourself last and serving everybody else, even when it doesn't feel so great, even when you get no recognition for it. We see this all the time with really great parents, right? With really the parents that you and I admire, maybe the ones you had or the ones you were. They're the parents who put their kids first and love on their parents, who stay up late at night with their kids and don't even yell at them later. We know what that looks like. Jesus says you got to be a servant of all. Remember, Jesus just predicted his own death and resurrection, so let's tie those things together. You want to be a servant of all. Jesus is willing to serve everyone, even the people who are crying out for his crucifixion, even the people who don't like him, who despise him, who think he's ruining the world, the ones who would get on the internet and write all these mean things about him. He's talking about them. You got to be a servant of them just like he is. And so to drive his point home, he has an object lesson. Look in verse 36. He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. And we know that that's the Father, God the Father. Well, if Jesus was going to use an object lesson, this is kind of not a fun one for the disciples. Because as much as we like to idealize childhood in our day, right? Children and in childhood, that's all this moment to be treasured. It's precious. We value it. We idealize it. That wasn't that way in the ancient world. Today, we try to protect children at all costs. We want to love on them. We want to hold our kids close. In Jesus' day, that was not a thing. That was not a thing. children needed to be made to stay away. They needed to be quiet. In fact, if you go looking through ancient literature, especially Roman literature, they don't really mention kids. They don't talk about them. Even in medical journals, they don't really talk about them that much because children weren't important. Children couldn't do anything for you until they were adults. They had basically no rights. All of their rights were tied to the man of whatever household they resided in. They're also kind of viewed as property. So when Jesus takes this little child and says, you need to welcome this child if you want to welcome me, well, that's kind of confounding to these 12 grown Jewish men who live in a patriarchal society. They're saying, you want us to welcome this child in your name the same way that we would welcome an ambassador from another country in that king's name? You want us to what? Like, you were supposed to view them with that level of importance? This child can't do anything, Jesus. This child can't do anything for us. Why would we ever treat them with that level of dignity and that level of respect? What are you talking about, Jesus? Jesus says, yeah. Because when you do that, you welcome me. And when you welcome me, you welcome the Father. Now, you also got to keep in mind, Jesus just said, I want you to be the servant of all. If you want to be the greatest, you got to be the servant of all. Let's tie that with the children. You have to be willing to serve this child who can do nothing for you. You have to be willing to serve this child who could never pay you back. You have to be willing to serve people who are insignificant to you. You know, at some point in your life, you've probably heard this phrase. Just accept Jesus into your heart. You heard that? Accept Jesus into your heart. And unfortunately, what a lot of people hear when they hear that is, accept Jesus into your heart, pray a prayer, say that prayer, then when you die, you get to go to heaven, and the end. But that's not it. That's not how this is supposed to go. When we say accept Jesus in your heart, what we mean is welcome Jesus into your life and start making your life look like Jesus. Start making the things you do and the way you approach life look like Jesus. Accept Him as Lord of your life and allow Him to kind of guide you in the direction that you would go. Make Him King of your life. Welcome Him in. But here's what Jesus is saying. You can't welcome Him unless you're willing to serve people who are otherwise insignificant to you in the same way that He does. So here's what I want you to understand. Welcoming Jesus means serving people that you don't have to. Welcoming Jesus means serving people you don't have to. And I don't mean in the bland, hey, let's get out and do something nice for some people. I mean for people who really show up in your life. If you want to welcome Jesus into your heart, you want to make Jesus King of your life, then it necessarily involves serving people that you don't have to. People who may be insignificant to your life, people who could never pay you back, people, if they got mad at you, it wouldn't matter at all to you. You got to serve them, just like Jesus did. I'm talking about homeless people. There are so many ways you can serve the homeless community within our city. So many ways you can do that. It's not just driving up and rolling down your window and handing somebody a dollar bill at a stop sign, at a stoplight. It's more than that. It's getting involved in organizations that are advocating for them. It's getting involved in organizations that are really meeting needs. We actually, as a church, help sponsor one called the Christian Service Center. You could go and just do the soup kitchen one day if you wanted to. It's really easy to sign up. I'll help you do it. It's helping children. It's serving children. A lot of you in this room, you've helped in different ways with our kids ministry here, but it's also getting out into our community, helping do things. Can I tell you what a great blessing it is for parents when they see an adult from the community helping out at like a Little League baseball game? They get nothing out of it other than just wanting to be there and support families. Welcoming Jesus means serving people that you don't have to. This includes people like immigrants who have a really tough time getting acclimated to the culture they've moved into. One of the things you can do in our church is like be involved in our ESL classes. Serving people that you don't have to. Let's take it a step further. Let's really be like Jesus, because all of life, right, ends up coming back to, am I being molded into the image of Christ? Am I starting to look like Jesus? What about serving people you don't want to? People who don't like you. Now, I know you're a pretty great person, but I'm sure there may be somebody out there who doesn't think as highly of you as I do. What about serving them? The ones who don't speak so greatly about you. Because that's exactly what Jesus did. You want to welcome Jesus into your heart? You want to make him king of your life? Serve other people. Bring heaven to earth now. Because eternity doesn't start whenever you die. Eternity starts when you say yes to Jesus. It starts from that moment on. Start serving. Start living in the kingdom now. In a moment, we're going to sing again, and I'm going to ask you to stand. But before we do, I want you to know this. My goal, my hope, and my prayer for you is that you will welcome Jesus into your heart and lean into that direction. Lean into that direction and serve people you don't have to. I dare you to do it, because ultimately that's how we change the world. Let me pray for you. Lord, we thank you for today, and we thank you that you set the example of service. That you said, look, if you want to be great, if you want to be known, you want people to notice you, then you just go out here and do something where nobody will notice you, where nobody will appreciate you. Go and be a servant of everyone. I pray for everyone listening to me right now that you would help each of us to go and to serve. To serve people we don't have to serve people we may not want to. Knowing that all the while, you're changing hearts. You're moving in hearts and in our world. You're changing us and sculpting us into your image.